They came into our living rooms every week and made us feel like family. But tonight, we're visiting the graves of beloved sitcom stars that almost no one comes to see anymore. The laugh tracks faded, the reruns slowed, and the flowers stopped coming. Some rest beneath grand monuments. Some lie in quiet corners the world forgot. Let's begin, one familiar face at a time. We begin in Los Angeles, at Forest Lawn Memorial Park in the Hollywood Hills, where one of the most beloved television mothers in American history rests in quiet dignity. Lucille Ball was, and remains, the most influential woman in the history of television comedy, a performer whose gift for physical comedy has never been surpassed. She was born in Jamestown, New York, in 1911, and endured years of struggle as a B-movie actress, dismissed as the Queen of the Bees, before television made her immortal. In 1951, she and her husband, the Cuban bandleader Desi Arnaz, created I Love Lucy, and the world was never the same. Her Lucy Ricardo, forever scheming her way into show business against the wishes of her husband Ricky, was a masterpiece of comic invention, and the show pioneered the very techniques, the multi-camera setup, the live studio audience, the rerun itself, that would define television for generations. She became the first woman to run a major television studio, Desilu, which produced landmark shows including Star Trek and Mission Impossible. Behind the comic genius was a shrewd, hard-working, and often lonely woman whose marriage to Arnaz, the great love of her life, collapsed under the weight of his drinking and their fame. They divorced, though they remained close until his death, and she married again. Lucille Ball died in 1989 at 77 of a ruptured aorta, days after heart surgery. She was cremated, and after a complicated journey, her ashes were eventually moved to her family plot in Lakeview Cemetery in Jamestown, New York, the town where she was born. So the greatest comedienne in television history does not rest in Hollywood at all, but in a quiet cemetery in western New York, beside her mother and grandparents, where devoted fans make the pilgrimage to her hometown, though most of the millions who still laugh at her reruns have no idea she lies there. We travel now to Culver City, California, to Holy Cross Cemetery, where the man who played Lucy's beloved landlord and foil rests in a quiet Catholic plot. William Frawley was already an old vaudeville and film veteran when television made him a household name as Fred Mertz, the grumpy, penny-pinching landlord and best friend on I Love Lucy. He was born in Iowa in 1887 and spent decades in vaudeville and in more than 100 films before the role of Fred Mertz, opposite Vivien Vance as his wife Ethel, made him one of the most recognizable character actors in America. His gruff delivery and perfect comic timing were essential to the chemistry of the show, and the bickering Mertzes became as beloved as the Ricardos themselves. In real life, Frawley was a cantankerous, hard-drinking man, and his relationship with Vivien Vance was famously frosty. She reportedly found him disagreeable and resented being cast as the wife of a man so much older than she was. Yet on screen, their partnership was flawless. After I Love Lucy ended, Frawley found a warm second act as the lovable Irish grandfather Bub on My Three Sons, continuing to work until his health failed. William Frawley died in 1966 at 79, collapsing of a heart attack on Hollywood Boulevard after leaving a movie theater, a fittingly cinematic end for a man who had spent his life in show business. He is buried at Holy Cross Cemetery in Culver City, in the same cemetery as Bing Crosby and Rita Hayworth. His grave is a modest flat marker, giving only his name and dates, with nothing to indicate that he was one of the most beloved comic sidekicks in the history of American television. Fans of classic television occasionally seek him out, but for most of the year, the beloved Fred Mertz rests in near total silence in his quiet Catholic plot. His familiar grumbling long faded from the airwaves. We travel now to a resting place that captures the loneliness at the heart of this story, for the woman who played Ethel Mertz did not rest anywhere at all. Vivien Vance brought warmth, humor, and a put-upon dignity to Ethel Mertz, Lucy's loyal best friend and neighbor, in one of the great comedy partnerships in television history. She was born Vivian Roberta Jones in Kansas in 1909 and worked for years on the Broadway stage before being cast opposite Lucille Ball, a pairing that would define both their careers. The friendship between Lucy and Ethel felt real because, unlike her frosty relationship with William Frawley, Vance's bond with Lucille Ball was genuine and deep, a true friendship that lasted the rest of their lives. Vance was a gifted comedienne in her own right, willing to be the frumpy foil to Ball's glamour, and her generosity as a performer helped make the show the masterpiece it was. She continued to work with Ball for years afterward, appearing on The Lucy Show, and the two remained devoted friends until Vance's death. Off-screen, Vance was a passionate advocate for mental health awareness, having struggled with depression and anxiety herself, and she spoke openly about it at a time when few public figures would. Vivien Vance died of breast and bone cancer in 1979 at 70 at her home in California. In keeping with her wishes, she was cremated and her ashes were scattered, leaving no grave and no marker behind. So the beloved Ethel Mertz, one of the most cherished best friends in the history of television, has no resting place that any fan can visit, nowhere to leave a flower, nothing to mark where she came to rest. She lives on only in the reruns, forever at Lucy's side, scheming and laughing through the black and white episodes that made them both immortal. While in the physical world she left no trace at all, her ashes committed quietly to the California air she loved. We travel now to Westwood, to Pierce Brothers' Westwood Village Memorial Park, where a charismatic star of a hit wartime comedy rests in a crowded celebrity cemetery. Bob Crane, the star of Hogan's Heroes, whose life ended in one of the most shocking and disturbing mysteries in Hollywood history. He was born in Connecticut in 1928 and began as a popular radio disc jockey before his good looks and quick wit brought him to television. In 1965, he became a star as Colonel Robert Hogan, the smooth, scheming leader of a group of Allied prisoners of war, running circles around their bumbling German captors in the improbably successful wartime comedy Hogan's Heroes. The show was a major hit and ran for 6 seasons, making Bob Crane a household name and a beloved television star. But after the series ended, his career declined, and his private life spiraled into a secret world of compulsive sexual behavior that he documented obsessively. On the 4th of July 1978, Bob Crane was found bludgeoned to death in his apartment in Scottsdale, Arizona, where he had been performing in a dinner theater production. He was 49 years old. The murder was never definitively solved. A friend of his was tried and acquitted decades later, and the case remains officially open. The lurid details that emerged about his private life shocked the public and permanently altered his image. Bob Crane is buried at Pierce Brothers' Westwood Village Memorial Park in Los Angeles, the same small, star-packed cemetery where Marilyn Monroe rests, though he was originally buried elsewhere before being moved. His grave is quiet, overshadowed by the more famous names around it, and the beloved Colonel Hogan, who once led television's cleverest prisoners of war, rests now in a silence broken only by the occasional curious visitor, drawn more by the mystery of his death than the warmth of his comedy. We travel now to the grave of a man whose gentle, bumbling warmth made him one of the most beloved figures on that same wartime comedy, and whose end was far quieter. John Banner played the lovable, hapless Sergeant Schultz on Hogan's Heroes, the rotund German guard whose catchphrase, "I know nothing," became one of the most quoted lines in television history. He was born a Jewish man in Austria in 1910, and his real life was marked by a profound irony that few of his fans ever knew. When the Nazis annexed Austria in 1938, Banner, as a Jew, was forced to flee for his life, and many members of his family were murdered in the concentration camps. He escaped to America with almost nothing, and he built a career as a character actor, often, in another bitter irony, playing the very Germans whose regime had destroyed his family. When he was cast as the good-natured Sergeant Schultz, a German soldier who was really no threat at all, who wanted nothing more than to look the other way and avoid trouble, Banner reportedly saw the role as a kind of quiet triumph, a way of mocking the Nazism that had cost him so much. He once said that Schultz was not a Nazi, but a man representing a kind of willful, harmless ignorance. His warmth made the character beloved around the world. John Banner died in 1973, on his 63rd birthday, of an abdominal hemorrhage while visiting Vienna, the city he had once fled. He was cremated. A memorial marker for him exists, but his beloved Sergeant Schultz, the gentle giant who knew nothing, is largely forgotten today except by devoted fans of the show. His own extraordinary story of survival and quiet revenge, almost entirely unknown to the audiences who laughed at his bumbling. He rests now far from the spotlight, the warm heart of a beloved comedy, his remarkable true life story fading into history. We travel now to New York, to a resting place for one of the most towering figures in the history of television comedy, a man whose show changed the medium forever. Jackie Gleason was known as the Great One, a giant of early television whose creation of Ralph Kramden on The Honeymooners produced one of the most influential sitcoms ever made. He was born in Brooklyn in 1916, into poverty and a broken home, and he clawed his way up through pool halls, carnivals, and nightclubs to become one of the biggest stars in America. His masterpiece was The Honeymooners, in which he played Ralph Kramden, a loud, blustering, perpetually scheming New York City bus driver whose big dreams always collapsed, but whose love for his sharp-tongued wife Alice always shone through in the end. His catchphrases, and his famous closing line to Alice, "One of these days," and the tender bang zoom that revealed the softy beneath the bluster, became part of the American vocabulary. Though the classic filmed season of The Honeymooners consisted of only 39 episodes, its influence was incalculable, inspiring everything from the Flintstones to countless working-class family comedies that followed. Gleason was a man of enormous appetites, for food, for drink, for life, and he was also a serious, dramatic actor, earning an Academy Award nomination for The Hustler. Jackie Gleason died of cancer in 1987, at 71, at his home in Florida. He is entombed at Our Lady of Mercy Cemetery in Miami, in an elaborate outdoor mausoleum he designed himself, with a grand curving staircase and the inscription, chosen by the great comedian himself, that reads simply, "And away we go," his famous catchphrase carved for eternity. Despite the grandeur of the tomb, few visitors make the journey to the Miami cemetery, and the great one, whose Ralph Kramden shaped the entire future of the television sitcom, rests in a monument to himself that almost no one comes to see, his booming voice and his tender heart living on only in the 39 immortal episodes. We travel now to honor the man who played Ralph Kramden's best friend, the goofy, good-natured sewer worker who was his perfect comic partner. Art Carney created the beloved Ed Norton on The Honeymooners, the dim but sweet-natured underground sewer worker whose loose-limbed physical comedy and dopey charm made him the perfect foil to Jackie Gleason's blustering Ralph Kramden. He was born in Mount Vernon, New York, in 1918, the youngest of 6 brothers, and he developed his gift for mimicry and physical comedy early. His partnership with Gleason was one of the greatest in television history, the tall, elastic Norton bouncing off the round, explosive Kramden in a rhythm that felt almost like a dance. Carney's ability to make a simple act, like preparing to write a letter or sitting down at a table, into an elaborate comic routine was a thing of genius, and he won multiple Emmy Awards for the role. But Art Carney was far more than a comic sidekick. He was a serious and deeply gifted actor who struggled privately with alcoholism and depression, wounds partly rooted in his traumatic service in the Second World War, where he was wounded at Normandy and left with a permanent limp. In 1974, he stunned Hollywood by winning the Academy Award for Best Actor for the film Harry and Tonto, beating out Al Pacino and Jack Nicholson, proving he was one of the finest actors of his generation. Art Carney died in 2003 at 85 after years of declining health. He is buried at Riverside Cemetery in Chester, Connecticut, in the quiet New England countryside far from Hollywood. His grave is a modest stone, and few visitors ever make the trip to the small Connecticut town where the beloved Ed Norton rests. The greatest comic sidekick in the history of television, and an Oscar-winning actor besides, lies in near-total silence, his loose-limbed sewer worker still bouncing through the reruns, while his grave sits quiet and unvisited. We travel now to honor the star of one of the most cherished rural comedies in television history, a man whose sheriff was the moral center of a fictional town that millions wished they could live in. Andy Griffith, whose sheriff Andy Taylor on The Andy Griffith Show created one of the most beloved and enduring worlds in the history of American television. He was born in Mount Airy, North Carolina in 1926, the small town that would inspire the fictional Mayberry, and he began as a monologist and singer before his warm, folksy presence made him a star. As the widowed sheriff raising his young son Opie, played by a young Ron Howard, with the help of his beloved Aunt Bea and his high-strung deputy Barney Fife, Griffith anchored a show that was less about jokes than about kindness, community, and gentle human decency. Mayberry became a national symbol of a simpler, kinder America, real or imagined, and the show has never left the air in more than 60 years. Griffith later found a whole new generation of fans as the folksy lawyer in Matlock. He was a devout man and a serious actor, memorable in the dark film A Face in the Crowd. Andy Griffith died in 2012 at 86, at his home on Roanoke Island in North Carolina. In keeping with his wishes, He was buried within hours of his death, in a private family plot on his own property on the island he loved. His grave is on private land and cannot be visited by the public, so the beloved Sheriff of Mayberry, who welcomed America into his town for 6 decades, rests where no fan can ever follow, on his quiet island in the North Carolina Sounds. We travel now to honor the beloved comic genius who played that high-strung deputy, whose nervous energy made him one of the funniest men in television history. Don Knotts created the immortal Barney Fife on The Andy Griffith Show, the twitchy, self-important, wildly incompetent deputy sheriff whose single bullet, which he was allowed to keep in his shirt pocket rather than his gun, became one of the most beloved running jokes in television. He was born in Morgantown, West Virginia, in 1924, into poverty and a difficult childhood, and he developed his nervous, high-strung comic persona over years of struggle in radio and on the stage. As Barney Fife, the deputy who was all bluster and no competence, forever puffing up his chest and then collapsing into panic, Knotts created a character of such perfect comic construction that he won 5 Emmy Awards for the role, an almost unheard-of achievement. His chemistry with Andy Griffith was the beating heart of the show, the calm sheriff and his manic deputy, and their friendship was genuine and lifelong. After leaving the show, Knotts became a movie star in a series of beloved family comedies, and he found a whole new audience decades later as the leisure-suited landlord Mr. Frawley on Three's Company. Behind the manic comedy, Knotts was a quiet, sensitive, and often melancholy man who battled anxiety and hypochondria his whole life, the very qualities he channeled so brilliantly into Barney Fife. Don Knotts died in 2006 at 81 of lung cancer, with Andy Griffith reportedly at his side in his final days, the two old friends together at the end. He is entombed at Westwood Village Memorial Park in Los Angeles, the small celebrity cemetery where so many stars rest. His crypt is quiet, and though devoted fans do seek him out, the beloved Barney Fife, one of the greatest comic creations in television history, rests largely unvisited among the more famous names that surround him. We travel now to honor the beloved actress who played the kindly Aunt Bea, the warm heart of that same fictional town. Frances Bavier brought a gentle, matronly warmth to Aunt Bea Taylor on The Andy Griffith Show, the widowed aunt who kept house for Sheriff Andy and raised young Opie alongside him, becoming America's television aunt for a generation. She was born in New York City in 1902 and was a serious, classically trained stage actress who had worked on Broadway and in films for decades before television made her a beloved household name. As Aunt Bea, with her pies, her fussing, and her deep love for her family, she embodied a certain ideal of small-town maternal warmth that resonated deeply with audiences and helped make Mayberry feel like home. Yet the reality behind the character was far more complicated and sad. Frances Bavier was, by many accounts, a private, formal, and somewhat difficult woman who did not entirely enjoy her time on the show and who reportedly clashed with Andy Griffith during the production, a tension that lingered for years. After the series ended, she retired to Siler City, North Carolina, choosing to live out her days in the kind of small southern town her character had made famous, perhaps seeking the warmth that the role had represented. But she grew increasingly reclusive and isolated in her final years, living alone with many cats, rarely seeing anyone. Late in her life, she reportedly reconciled by telephone with Andy Griffith, easing the old tension between them. Frances Bavier died in 1989 at 86 in Siler City, of heart failure and cancer. She is buried at Oakwood Cemetery in Siler City, North Carolina, in the small town she had made her home. Her grave is quiet, visited occasionally by fans of the show, but the beloved Aunt Bea, who fed and mothered all of America from her television kitchen, rests largely alone in the southern town where she spent her lonely final years. We travel now to honor one of the most beloved and versatile performers in the history of television, a woman who was a star across 5 different decades. Betty White was a pioneer of television comedy whose career spanned an astonishing 8 decades, from the earliest days of the medium to the age of the internet, making her one of the most beloved entertainers in American history. She was born in Illinois in 1922 and was one of the first women to work both in front of and behind the camera in early television, producing and starring in her own show in the 1950s. But she became a true sitcom legend twice over. First as the man-hungry, deceptively sweet Sue Ann Nivens on The Mary Tyler Moore Show in the 1970s, and then most beloved of all, as the sweet, dim, and endlessly literal Rose Nyland on The Golden Girls in the 1980s. As Rose, the naive widow from the small town of St. Tandé, Olaf, forever telling bewildering stories about her Scandinavian hometown, White created one of the most beloved characters in sitcom history, and The Golden Girls became a landmark show about older women living full, funny, vibrant lives. She was the last surviving Golden Girl, outliving all three of her co-stars by many years. In her final decades, Betty White became a genuine national treasure, embraced by young and old alike, hosting Saturday Night Live in her late 80s and becoming an icon of joyful, irreverent longevity. Betty White died on the 31st of December 2021, just weeks before her 100th birthday, at her home in Los Angeles. Her passing, at the very end of the year, felt to many like the closing of an era. She was cremated, and her ashes remained private, with no public grave, in keeping with the dignity she maintained throughout her long life. So the beloved Rose Nyland, one of the most cherished sitcom characters ever created, and one of the most beloved women in the history of television, left no grave for her millions of admirers to visit, only the vast and joyful legacy of her 80 years of laughter. We travel now to honor the beloved actress who played the sharp-tongued oldest of the Golden Girls, whose one-liners were legendary. Estelle Getty played Sophia Petrillo on The Golden Girls, the tiny, wisecracking Sicilian mother whose brutally honest one-liners, usually delivered after her famous opening, "Picture it, Sicily," made her one of the most beloved characters on the beloved show. In one of the great ironies of television, Estelle Getty was actually younger than Bea Arthur, who played her daughter Dorothy, and had to be aged with heavy makeup to play the character. She was born in New York City in 1923, the daughter of Jewish immigrants, and she spent decades as a struggling actress in the Yiddish theater and in small stage roles, not finding real fame until she was past 60, when The Golden Girls made her, at last, a star. As Sophia, freshly escaped from the Shady Pines retirement home, armed with her wicker purse and her devastating wit, Getty stole scene after scene from her more established co-stars, and she won an Emmy Award for the role. Her late-in-life stardom was a genuine Hollywood fairy tale, proof that recognition could come at any age. But Getty suffered privately from severe stage fright and anxiety, and in her later years, she developed Lewy body dementia, a cruel disease that slowly robbed her of the memory and the words that had been her instruments. She retired from acting as the illness progressed, disappearing gradually from public life. Estelle Getty died in 2008, at 84, of the dementia that had claimed her final years. She was cremated, and her ashes were interred at Hollywood Forever Cemetery in Los Angeles. Her resting place is quiet, and though Hollywood Forever draws many visitors, few seek out the beloved Sophia Petrillo, whose razor-sharp wit once made millions laugh, her tiny frame and enormous personality living on only in the reruns of the show that finally made her a star after a lifetime of waiting. We travel now to honor the tall, deep-voiced actress who played Sophia's put-upon daughter Dorothy, the dry, sardonic heart of the Golden Girls. Bea Arthur was a commanding presence in American comedy, a tall, deadpan actress with a booming voice and impeccable timing who created two of the most iconic characters in sitcom history. She was born Bernice Frankel in New York in 1922 and served in the Marine Corps during the Second World War before pursuing a career on the stage, where she became a celebrated Broadway actress, winning a Tony Award. Television made her a legend first in the 1970s, as the outspoken, liberal, endlessly divorcing title character of Maude, a groundbreaking spin-off of All in the Family that tackled controversial subjects no sitcom had dared touch before, with Arthur's fearless Maude at its center. Then, in the 1980s, she became beloved all over again as Dorothy Zbornak on The Golden Girls, the sarcastic, long-suffering substitute teacher whose withering glares and dry retorts anchored the show. Her comic timing was flawless, and her chemistry with her three co-stars was the engine of one of the most beloved sitcoms ever made. Off-screen, Arthur was a private, dignified woman and a passionate advocate for animal welfare and other causes. Bea Arthur died of cancer in 2009 at 86 at her home in Los Angeles. In keeping with her wishes, she was cremated, and her ashes were kept privately by her family, with no public grave and no marker for her admirers to visit. So the beloved Dorothy Zbornak and the fearless Maude before her one of the most commanding and iconic figures in the entire history of television comedy, left no resting place that any fan can find, nowhere to stand and remember her. She lives on only in the reruns, forever rolling her eyes at her mother's insults, her booming voice and perfect timing echoing through the episodes that made her a legend twice over. We travel now to honor the glamorous Southern belle who completed the quartet, the man-loving Blanche of the Golden Girls. Rue McClanahan played Blanche Devereaux on the Golden Girls, the vain, flirtatious, endlessly romantic Southern belle whose exaggerated Georgia drawl and insatiable love of men made her one of the funniest characters on the beloved show. She was born in Oklahoma in 1934 and worked for years in regional theater and off-Broadway before finding television success, first in a supporting role on Maude alongside Bea Arthur, a partnership that would later reunite them on the Golden Girls. As Blanche, the oldest of the four in spirit, if not in years, forever preening and pursuing romance with the confidence of a woman half her age, McClanahan created a character who was both a comic caricature and, in the show's more tender moments, a genuinely warm and vulnerable woman. She won an Emmy Award for the role, and her Blanche remains one of the most quoted and beloved characters in sitcom history. Like her co-stars, McClanahan was a passionate advocate for causes she believed in, particularly animal rights, and she was open in later years about her own health struggles, including breast cancer, which she survived, and heart problems. Rue McClanahan died in 2010 at 76 of a brain hemorrhage following a stroke in New York City. With her passing, only Betty White remained of the four Golden Girls. McClanahan was cremated, and her ashes were kept privately, with no public grave for fans to visit. So the beloved Blanche Devereaux, the glamorous, flirtatious heart of one of television's most cherished ensembles, left no resting place behind, nowhere for her admirers to pay their respects. Three of the four Golden Girls left no grave at all, their ashes scattered or kept private, so that the beloved quartet who taught America that life and friendship and laughter could flourish at any age rests, in the physical world, almost nowhere, living on only in the golden glow of the reruns. We travel, now, to honor the star of one of the most important working-class comedies in television history, whose blustering bigot somehow became one of the most beloved characters in America. Carroll O'Connor, whose Archie Bunker on All in the Family was one of the most important and influential characters in the history of the medium. He was born in New York City in 1924, and was a serious, classically trained actor who had worked extensively on the stage and in film before television made him a legend. As Archie Bunker, the loud, bigoted, working-class Queens family man whose prejudices were constantly challenged by his liberal son-in-law, O'Connor created a character of astonishing complexity, a man whose ignorance and bluster masked a deep vulnerability and, ultimately, a kind of wounded humanity. All in the Family, which premiered in 1971, shattered every taboo in television comedy, tackling racism, war, poverty, and prejudice head-on, and it became the most-watched show in America for years, changing the medium forever. The genius of O'Connor's performance was that he made Archie, for all his awful views, into a fully human and even sympathetic figure, which was precisely what made the show so powerful and so controversial. O'Connor later found further success as a wise Southern police chief on In the Heat of the Night. His final years were shadowed by tragedy, especially the suicide of his adopted son, which led O'Connor to become a passionate advocate against drug abuse. Carroll O'Connor died in 2001 at 76 of a heart attack complicated by diabetes. He is buried at Westwood Village Memorial Park in Los Angeles. His grave is quiet, and the beloved Archie Bunker, who forced America to look at itself, rests largely unvisited among the stars. We travel now to honor the actress who played Archie Bunker's sweet, scattered, endlessly patient wife, the beloved Edith. Jean Stapleton created Edith Bunker on All in the Family, the sweet, warbling, good-hearted wife of the bigoted Archie, whose innocence and fundamental decency provided the moral counterweight to her husband's prejudice and made her one of the most beloved characters on television. She was born Jean Murray in New York City in 1923 and was an accomplished stage actress before television immortalized her as Edith. As the Dingbat, as Archie affectionately and dismissively called her, Edith was far wiser and kinder than her scattered manner suggested. And Stapleton imbued her with such warmth and genuine goodness that Edith became the beating heart of the groundbreaking show. In the show's most powerful moments, Edith's simple, unwavering decency exposed the cruelty and foolishness of the prejudices around her, and Stapleton handled both the broad comedy and the show's serious dramatic turns, including a harrowing episode about an attempted assault on Edith, with extraordinary skill. She won 3 Emmy Awards for the role. Stapleton was, in real life, a sophisticated, intelligent, and independent woman, quite unlike the character she played, and she was a committed feminist who eventually asked that Edith be written out of the show because she wanted to pursue other work and did not want to be defined by the single role. Jean Stapleton died in 2013 at 90, of natural causes, at her home in New York City. She was cremated. The beloved Edith Bunker, whose gentle goodness helped a divided nation laugh and reflect at the same time, left no grand public grave. Her ashes kept privately by the family who loved her, so that the warm heart of one of television's most important shows rests quietly out of public view, her warbling voice and her boundless kindness living on only in the reruns. We travel now to honor a beloved and groundbreaking star of the workplace sitcom, whose newsroom became one of the most cherished settings in television history. Mary Tyler Moore was a beloved and pioneering actress whose 2 landmark sitcoms helped define television across 2 decades and changed how American women were portrayed on screen. She was born in Brooklyn in 1936 and first became a star as Laura Petrie on The Dick Van Dyke Show in the 1960s. The stylish, capable wife, whose capri pants and comic grace made her a fashion icon and a fresh new kind of television wife. But her true landmark came in the 1970s with The Mary Tyler Moore Show, in which she played Mary Richards, a single, independent career woman working at a Minneapolis television newsroom, a character who represented a genuinely new vision of American womanhood, unmarried and thriving on her own terms. The show was a masterpiece of ensemble comedy and a cultural landmark, and its image of Mary joyfully throwing her hat into the air became an enduring symbol of female independence and possibility. Behind her sunny screen presence, Moore's real life was marked by profound struggles, including alcoholism, type 1 diabetes, and the devastating loss of her only son to an accidental shooting. She channeled much of her later life into advocacy for diabetes research and animal welfare. Mary Tyler Moore died in 2017 at 80 of cardiopulmonary complications. She is buried at Oakland Cemetery in Woodbury, Connecticut, in the quiet New England countryside, far from Hollywood. Her grave is a modest stone in a small country cemetery, and few of the millions who loved her ever make the journey to the rural Connecticut town where she rests. The woman who taught a generation that they might just make it after all, whose Mary Richards changed how television saw women, lies now in near total silence, her joyful hat toss frozen forever in the show's opening credits, while her grave sits quiet and unvisited. We travel now to honor the gruff but lovable news director who anchored that beloved Minneapolis newsroom, Mary's boss with the heart of gold. Edward Asner created Lou Grant on The Mary Tyler Moore Show, the gruff, hard-drinking, soft-hearted news director whose famous first line to Mary, "You've got spunk," followed by, "I hate spunk," became one of the most beloved moments in sitcom history. He was born in Kansas City in 1929, the son of Orthodox Jewish immigrants, and he became one of the most respected and prolific character actors of his generation. As Lou Grant, the blustering boss who hid a deep well of loyalty and tenderness beneath his gruff exterior, Asner created a beloved television figure, and in a highly unusual achievement, he continued to play the same character in a dramatic spin-off series, Lou Grant, moving the character from comedy to serious drama and winning Emmy Awards in both genres, something no other actor has ever done. Beyond his acting, Asner was known for his passionate and often controversial political activism and for his long service as president of the Screen Actors Guild. He remained a beloved and busy actor into his 90s, introducing himself to whole new generations as the voice of the old man Carl in the animated film Up. Edward Asner died in 2021 at 91, of natural causes, at his home in Los Angeles. He was one of the last surviving stars of the classic Mary Tyler Moore Show ensemble. He was cremated. The beloved Lou Grant, one of the most cherished bosses in the history of television, whose gruff exterior concealed one of the warmest hearts on screen, left no grand public grave, his ashes kept privately, so that the man who told Mary Richards he hated spunk and loved her all the same rests quietly out of public view, his booming voice and his hidden tenderness living on only in the reruns of the newsroom he ruled. We travel now to honor a beloved star of one of television's most cherished military comedies, a show that made a generation laugh and cry at once. Harry Morgan, whose Colonel Sherman Potter brought warmth and gravity to the beloved series MASH. He was born Harry Bratsburg in Detroit in 1915 and was a veteran character actor of films and television for decades before MASH made him a beloved television figure. He joined the landmark Korean War comedy drama in its 4th season as Colonel Potter, the folksy, horse-loving, deeply humane commanding officer of the Mobile Army Hospital, replacing the original commander and quickly becoming one of the most beloved figures in the ensemble. As Potter, Morgan brought a settled, fatherly warmth and a core of genuine decency to a show that balanced broad comedy with the horrors of war, and he anchored the beloved series through its most acclaimed years. He had earlier been a beloved television presence on Dragnet and other shows, and his long career spanned more than 50 years and over 100 films. Morgan won an Emmy Award for his work as Colonel Potter, and the character's warmth made him a father figure to a generation of viewers. Harry Morgan died in 2011 at 96 of pneumonia at his home in Los Angeles. He is buried at Hollywood Forever Cemetery in Los Angeles, in the historic cemetery where so many stars rest. His grave is quiet, and the beloved Colonel Potter, whose steady warmth helped guide one of the most beloved shows in television history, rests largely unvisited, his gentle wisdom and his love of horses living on only in the reruns of the beloved war comedy. We travel now to honor a beloved actor from that same landmark war comedy, whose self-important surgeon was one of the great comic foils in television history. Larry Linville, whose Major Frank Burns on MASH was one of the most memorably loathsome and hilarious characters ever created for television. He was born in Ojai, California in 1939 and trained as a serious actor before finding his greatest fame as the incompetent, cowardly, sanctimonious army surgeon Frank Burns, the perfect comic villain of the beloved war comedy. As Frank Burns, forever scheming, forever failing, forever the butt of the jokes of the show's heroes Hawkeye and Trapper John, Linville created a character audiences loved to hate, and his hilarious pomposity was essential to the comic engine of the early seasons. It was a mark of Linville's skill as an actor that he could make such an unlikable character so consistently funny and so essential to the show. He left MASH after 5 seasons, feeling the character had nowhere left to go once his foils departed, a decision that may have cost him the enduring association with the show's most celebrated later years. He continued to work steadily in television for the rest of his career, though he never again found a role as iconic as Frank Burns. Larry Linville died in 2000 at 60, of complications from cancer and pneumonia, in New York City. He was cremated, and his ashes were kept privately, with no public grave for fans to visit. So, the beloved, loathsome Frank Burns, one of the great comic villains in the history of television, whose pompous scheming made a generation laugh, left no resting place behind. Nowhere for anyone to remember the gifted actor who made such a hateful character so unforgettable and so essential to one of the greatest sitcoms ever made. We travel now to honor a groundbreaking star of the 1970s, whose cantankerous junk dealer anchored one of the most cherished family comedies of its era. Red Fox, whose Fred Sanford on Sanford and Son was one of the most beloved and groundbreaking comic creations in television history. He was born John Elroy Sanford in St. Louis in 1922 and spent decades as a raucous, envelope-pushing nightclub comedian, famous for his raunchy party records, before television made him a household name late in his career. As Fred Sanford, the cantankerous, scheming Los Angeles junk dealer forever clutching his chest and faking heart attacks while calling out to his late wife, this is the big one, Elizabeth. Foxx created one of the most beloved characters on one of the first successful sitcoms, centered on a black family. Sanford and Son was an enormous hit in the 1970s, and Foxx's cranky, lovable junk dealer became a beloved figure across all of America. Behind the character, Foxx was a complicated man who struggled with money troubles and battles with the studios throughout his career, despite his enormous success. In a tragic irony, given his character's fake heart attacks, Red Fox died of a real heart attack in 1991 at 68, collapsing on the set of a new television show. Some who were present reportedly thought at first that he was doing his famous Fred Sanford bit. He is buried at Palm Memorial Park in Las Vegas, Nevada, the city where he had performed for so many years. His grave is quiet, and the beloved Fred Sanford, whose fake heart attacks made a nation laugh, rests largely unvisited in the desert, his cranky warmth living on only in the reruns. We travel now to honor a beloved and pioneering star, a woman whose sharp comic timing broke barriers on television. Isabel Sanford created Louise Jefferson, affectionately known as Wheezy, on The Jeffersons, the warm, sensible, no-nonsense wife of the blustering George Jefferson, anchoring one of the longest-running and most beloved sitcoms in American television history. She was born in New York City in 1917 and worked for decades in theater before her television career took off, first appearing as the Jefferson family on All in the Family before the characters were spun off into their own enormously successful series. As Louise Jefferson, the grounded, good-humored counterweight to her husband George's arrogance and ambition, Sanford created a beloved television wife, and her chemistry with Sherman Hemsley as George was the heart of the show. The Jeffersons, about an upwardly mobile black family who had, as the famous theme song put it, moved on up to the East Side, ran for 11 seasons, and became a landmark of American television. In 1981, Isabel Sanford made history when she became the first black woman to win the Emmy Award for Outstanding Lead Actress in a comedy series, a groundbreaking achievement that reflected both her talent and the barriers she had broken. She continued to work for years, always associated with the beloved Wheezy. Isabel Sanford died in 2004 at 86 of natural causes following surgery in Los Angeles. She is entombed at Inglewood Park Cemetery in California, in the historic cemetery where many great figures rest. Her crypt is quiet, and the beloved Louise Jefferson, a groundbreaking, Emmy-winning television pioneer whose warmth anchored one of the most beloved sitcoms ever made, rests largely unvisited. Her good humor and her sensible heart living on only in the reruns of the show she helped make a landmark. We travel now to honor the beloved actor whose arrogant, strutting George Jefferson was one of the funniest and most iconic characters in television history. Sherman Hemsley created George Jefferson on The Jeffersons, the strutting, arrogant, endlessly ambitious dry-cleaning magnate whose comic swagger and bluster made him one of the most beloved and quoted characters in the history of the American sitcom. He was born in Philadelphia in 1938, into poverty, and served in the Air Force before pursuing an acting career on the stage, eventually being cast as George Jefferson on All in the Family before the character was spun off into his own hit show. As George, the small man with the enormous ego, forever strutting across the room with his distinctive walk, forever scheming to climb higher and needle those around him, Hemsley created a comic masterpiece. A character whose arrogance was so exaggerated and so joyful that audiences adored him despite all his flaws. His chemistry with Isabel Sanford as his patient wife Wheezy anchored the beloved show through its 11-season run. Hemsley later found further sitcom success as the cranky deacon on Amos. Off-screen, he was, by contrast to his brash characters, a shy, private, and gentle man who loved progressive rock music and kept largely to himself. Sherman Hemsley died in 2012 at 74 of lung cancer at his home in El Paso, Texas. In a strange and sad epilogue, a dispute over his estate delayed his burial for months, leaving his body unburied while the matter was resolved in court. He was finally laid to rest at Fort Bliss National Cemetery in El Paso, honored for his military service. The beloved George Jefferson, whose strut and swagger made a nation laugh, rests now in a military cemetery in the Texas desert, largely unvisited. We travel now to honor a beloved star of one of television's most cherished ensemble comedies, set in a bar where everybody knew your name. Nicholas Colasanto, whose coach on Cheers brought a gentle, befuddled warmth to the beloved Boston bar comedy before his untimely death. He was born in Providence, Rhode Island, in 1924 and served in the Navy during the Second World War before becoming a respected television director and character actor over many years. Late in his career, he was cast as Ernie Pantuso, known to all as Coach, the sweet, absent-minded former baseball coach turned bartender, whose gentle confusion and kind heart made him an instant favorite on Cheers when the show premiered in 1982. As Coach, forever muddled but always warm, Colasanto created a beloved character who embodied the affectionate spirit of the bar where everybody knew your name. But Colasanto was in failing health, even as the show became a hit, suffering from heart disease, and he was often too ill to work as the first seasons progressed. Nicholas Colasanto died in 1985 at 61 of a heart attack during the show's third season, and his beloved coach was written out with great tenderness by the grieving cast and crew. He is buried at St. Anne's Cemetery in Cranston, Rhode Island, in his home state, far from Hollywood. In a touching tribute, a picture of Geronimo that had hung in Colasanto's dressing room was placed on the wall of the Cheers set, where it remained for the rest of the show's run, a quiet memorial to the beloved actor. His grave in Rhode Island is seldom visited today. We travel now to honor a beloved physical comedian whose accident-prone bachelor made a generation laugh. John Ritter, whose Jack Tripper on Three's Company made him one of the most beloved physical comedians in the history of television. He was born in Burbank, California, in 1948, the son of the country music star Tex Ritter, and he trained as a serious actor before his extraordinary gift for physical comedy made him a star. As Jack Tripper, the lovable, accident-prone bachelor who pretended to be gay in order to share an apartment with two women in the more conservative 1970s, Ritter created one of the great comic characters of the era, and his brilliant pratfalls, double takes, and physical gags made Three's Company an enormous hit. His comic timing and his fearless, rubber-limbed physicality drew comparisons to the great silent film comedians, and he won an Emmy Award for the beloved role. After the show ended, Ritter continued to work steadily and was enjoying a career resurgence in a new hit sitcom, 8 Simple Rules, and had just become a beloved presence to a whole new generation. Then tragedy struck with shocking suddenness. On the 11th of September 2003, John Ritter fell ill on the set of his show and died that night of an undiagnosed aortic dissection, a tear in his heart's main artery. He was just 54 years old, and his sudden death devastated his fans and colleagues. He is buried at Forest Lawn Memorial Park in the Hollywood Hills. His grave is quiet, and the beloved Jack Tripper, one of the greatest physical comedians television ever produced, rests largely unvisited, his brilliant pratfalls living on only in the reruns. We travel now to honor a beloved television patriarch whose warm, wise father figure defined a groundbreaking family comedy. John Amos, whose James Evans on Good Times brought strength, dignity, and love to one of the first television portraits of a working-class black family. He was born in Newark, New Jersey, in 1939, and was a football player and an advertising copywriter before turning to acting. As James Evans, the proud, hard-working father struggling to hold his family together in a Chicago housing project, Amos brought a fierce dignity and a deep well of love to a groundbreaking role, insisting on portraying a strong black father at a time when such images were rare on American television. Good Times was a landmark show, and Amos was its moral anchor, though he famously clashed with the producers over the direction of the series and the buffoonish turn of another character, a conflict that led to his character being killed off. Amos went on to a long and distinguished career, including a powerful, unforgettable role as the adult Kunta Kinte in the landmark miniseries Roots, which earned him an Emmy nomination and cemented his place in television history. He worked steadily for decades, a respected and beloved figure. John Amos died in 2024, at 84, of heart failure, in Los Angeles. The beloved James Evans, who brought such strength and dignity to one of television's first working-class black fathers, rests now largely out of the public eye, his fierce love and his quiet strength living on in the reruns of the groundbreaking show and in the unforgettable image of Kunta Kinte that he gave to the world. We travel now, for our final grave, to honor a beloved television mother whose warmth and strength held her fictional family together through hard times and laughter. Esther Roll created Florida Evans on the beloved sitcom Good Times, the strong, loving, deeply principled mother whose faith and determination held her struggling family together, becoming one of the most beloved television mothers in American history. She was born in Florida in 1920, the daughter of Bahamian immigrant farmers, and she became a distinguished stage actress and a pioneer of black theater in New York before television made her a star. The character of Florida first appeared as the housekeeper on Maude, before being spun off into Good Times, where Roll insisted that the character be given a strong husband and a real family, determined to portray a loving, intact black family on national television. As Florida, weathering poverty, loss, and hardship with unshakable dignity and faith, role created a beloved and dignified matriarch, and like her co-star John Amos, she fought hard behind the scenes for the integrity and dignity of the show's portrayal of Black family life, even leaving the series for a time in protest over its direction. She was a serious, principled artist who cared deeply about the images of Black Americans on screen, and she won an Emmy Award later in her career for a television film. Esther Roll died in 1998 at 78 of complications from diabetes in Los Angeles. She is buried at Westview Community Cemetery in Pompano Beach, Florida, near where she was born, in the state whose name she had carried as her character. Her grave is quiet, and the beloved Florida Evans, who brought such strength, faith, and dignity to one of television's most cherished mothers, rests in her Florida homeland, largely unvisited, her warmth and her principled heart living on in the reruns of the groundbreaking show she fought so hard to make meaningful. Beloved sitcom stars, resting across America, from Hollywood cemeteries to quiet country churchyards to graves on private land no fan can reach, what connects them is the strange loneliness of television fame. These were people who came into our homes every single week, who felt like family, who made us laugh at the dinner table and in our living rooms for years on end. And yet most of them rest now in near total silence. Some, like the great Golden Girls, left no grave at all, their ashes scattered or kept private, so that Bea Arthur and Rue McClanahan and Betty White and Estelle Getty and Vivien Vance before them and Jean Stapleton and Edward Asner and Bea Arthur left nowhere for their millions of admirers to visit. Some rest in hometowns far from Hollywood, like Lucille Ball in Jamestown and Mary Tyler Moore in Connecticut, and some, like Andy Griffith, rest on private land where no one can ever follow. They gave us comfort and laughter and the feeling of belonging. They were the familiar faces we welcomed into our homes, week after week, year after year. And now most of them lie in quiet graves the world has forgotten, or in no grave at all. What we can do, tonight and every night, is remember them. Watch their shows. Say their names. Think of the specific ground where each of them lies, or the air and the sea that hold those who left no grave behind. It costs us nothing, and it is the one thing we can still offer the performers who gave us so many hours of joy. They came into our living rooms and became our family. The least we can do is not forget where they finally came to rest. Thank you for walking with me. Rest well. And if you pass a cemetery in the coming week, and you have a moment, stop and read a name. Any name. Someone was loved, once, who is buried there. It costs us nothing, and it may be the only thing that keeps any of us from disappearing entirely. Good night, friends.